Hello, good morning, and a very warm welcome to today's Kroll webcast. It was just over a year ago that the government put the country into the first lockdown, and even then, I'm not sure we were quite grasped the enormity of what was ahead of us. 12 months on, tentatively, we're starting to contemplate life beyond the pandemic. And over the next hour, we can be certain of perspectives from a fantastic panel of speakers. For my part, the only clarity that I can give you with absolute confidence is to confirm that Duff & Phelps recently announced that our family of businesses are now going to market as Kroll. So if you were wondering, you are in the right place. But today's event, I'm Matt Ingram. I'm a managing director in our UK restructuring practice. 12 months ago, I hosted our first webcast where we sought to make some sense of what were at the time unprecedented restrictions on our daily lives. I was joined then, as I am today, by some colleagues, but we're also joined today by a fantastic panel of guests. And I'm looking forward, as I'm sure you all are, to hearing their perspectives through the course of the next hour today. But we'd also like to hear from you. So we're asking you to get involved in two ways today. Firstly, using the question box, which you should be able to see on your screen, please feel free to submit any questions you would like to be involved as part of the discussion. We won't be running a Q&A session as such at the end of today's program, but we're monitoring the questions that come in, and Michael will put them to the panelists as they land into his inbox. And secondly, we've now got just approaching 300 people online and climbing rapidly. So using the wonders of modern technology, we'd like to know what you think. So Michael will shortly pose 3 poll questions to you. They'll appear on your screen. The answer that closest fits your view, there's a little button, just click it. Dead simple, and we'll see how you're feeling. Get the mood of the room. That's used to be the phrase when we were allowed into rooms. So we've had a fantastic response to today's event. So much so that we actually began to worry how we were going to keep order, putting one of the UK's most senior bankers, one of the UK's most serial entrepreneurs, and one of the UK's top business journalists in a room together. The answer when it came to us was pretty obvious. You need a former defence secretary. And if it's a former defence secretary who's also served as Secretary of State for Employment and has also acted as a Treasury Cabinet Minister, and he's got a 20-year broadcasting career spanning TV and radio from politics ever through to great European railways, then I think you've probably found your man. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce our guest panelists and curate today's event, I am delighted and privileged to pass the proceedings over to Mr. Michael Portillo.
Matt, thank you very much for your very kind words of introduction. So the panelists appear on the screen in a particular order, and I'll try and introduce them in that order. So we've got David Fleming. He's from Duff & Phelps. He's the head of UK restructuring. We've got David Beaty, who's head of business banking at HSBC UK PLC. We have got Paul Tewton, who's also from Duff & Phelps. He's managing director corporate finance. We have Sarah Willingham. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Nightcap PLC. She's also a former dragon on BBC Two's Dragon's Den. And we've got Oliver Shah, who is the business editor of the Sunday Times. And I'm on Times Radio these days, so he and I are colleagues. I thought we might begin with a silent round and a visual one. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, we're looking at a 4% growth in the economy this year and a 7.3% growth in the economy next year. And according to the Bank of England, in comments made in this month, March of 2021, they expect a GDP at the end of this year, let's say December 2021, to be similar to what it was 2 years ago, that is to say December 2019. Panelists, do you agree that it is likely that the economy will be back to where it was at the end of this year 2 years ago, or better? If you think that it will be back to where it was 2 years ago at the end of this year, or better, please raise your hand. So, unfortunately, whatever happened there blotted out my view of all of the participants. So I didn't
it
see
is
the
live.
result.
It is live. Astrid, could we just take the poll question down so we can see and Michael
there they go.
again? There we go.
Would you mind, panelists, sorry, raising your hands if any of you did? Do you think we're going to be back to where we were? No panelist thinks we're going to be back to where we were. It probably follows then, second question, does any panelist believe that employment will be back to where it was at the end of this year to where it was 2 years ago? Okay, well, that's pretty clear outlook. Let's start with some questions. I'm going to go to David Beaty first. I'm going to say to you, has the pandemic left many businesses insolvent? Do you expect to see a significant increase in the number of formal insolvencies?
Are you coming to David Beaty or David Fleming for that question?
That was to David Beaty.
Am I expecting lots of companies to be left insolvent after this? The reality is that we've seen an enormous amount of companies get into financial difficulties through the pandemic. We all know that. What has been most noticeable for me is the intensity of the fall off. The reality is that this is the sharpest economic downturn that we've seen since the Great Frost of 1709, which I'm sure we all remember well. But what's really impacted is the immediacy. So many sectors and so many businesses all been impacted at once. That's not something that we've seen in other economic downturns. Now, our own customer surveys, Michael, say that typically around 14% of customers worry about whether they'll be able to repay their bank borrowing. We saw that more than double to 29%. Some confidence has come back, and that's down to 21% now. So sharply higher than we would normally expect to see. And so I think a certain level of insolvency is inevitable, clearly.
Thank you. And now let me turn to David Fleming. David Fleming, what do you think the insolvency picture is going to be?
Yeah, I very much agree. I think with David on that one, I think we'll see an increase at the back end of this year as the government temporary measures fall away and the furlough scheme falls away. So I would say Q4 this year we'll start to see an increase in the restructuring market, and I think that will most likely run for 1 to 2 years as the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic is seen. So I would very much expect an increase back end of this year, and then probably 2 to 3 years of an increase in insolvency in the restructuring market.
How concerned are you about that, David Fleming?
Well, it is concerning. I think I think your question in regards to employment, it was a good example of everybody thinking on the panel that we're not going to see a return in the employment levels, so there'll be people out of work. Obviously, there's a government debt burden that has been has happened during the COVID-19 as we've supported the companies out there with significant significant support. I think the debt levels within businesses are very high, so there'll be many years to come of people needing to trade the way out of and repay the debt. So that's from the C-bills and HMRC support, etc. So I'm very concerned. I think it's going to be a long journey to see us back to where we were in 2019.
David Beaty, I'd just like to come back to you. Obviously, you've been lending money to customers, and many of those customers will have all sorts of other obligations and difficulties that they may have been running into. They may be incurring redundancy costs, they may have accrued significant tax arrears, rent arrears, and so on. How do you put all that picture together?
Yes, well, I think that the reality is, Michael, with some of the government scheme lending, the bounce back loan scheme, for example, there were no affordability checks done on customers under the bounce back loan scheme because it was self-certification. But as a responsible lender, affordability is a key part of our credit decisions, and all of the other government loan schemes have included that affordability assessment. So we have specialist support teams ready to support customers in financial difficulties, and we've increased the resources that are within those teams. We've also announced actually a £15 billion SME fund to support customers moving forward in their growth aspirations. So we are ready to support in whatever way we can, Michael.
David Beaty, still with you. There must be the risk of reputational damage, though. We're talking here about clients who may have accrued all sorts of difficulties and debts and obligations, and you're going to have to make lending decisions, some of which may be negative, and it's likely to be the banks that get blamed. Am I right in thinking that?
Well, I think there is a big contrast between now, Michael, and say the financial crisis of 2008. Bank balance sheets are much stronger today than they were back in 2008, and the government loan support schemes are just one of the many support mechanisms the government has put in place. Actually, our own internal customer metrics say that over the last 12 months, customer satisfaction levels have actually increased. And I can tell you this, I have never as a banker had such proactive and direct positive customer feedback as I've had over the course of the last 12 months. If I give you three very short examples and to quote directly from customers, one customer said, "I will sleep tonight for the first time in many months." Another said, "When I told my staff that HSBC was supporting us, some of them cried." And another one said simply, "Thank you, you've saved my business." So I think it feels very different, Michael, in the way that banks have been able to support through the pandemic. I'm sure HSBC is just an example of the many banks that have done the same.
We have the result of the first poll. So the question was, how quickly do we think the economy is going to recover to pre-COVID-19 levels? Now, you'll remember that the Bank of England believes that that will be 6 to 12 months because it thinks we'll be back there in December 2021. But the participants in this webinar do not agree. So over a year, 23%, over 2 years, 61%, over 5 years, 11%. So this webinar is distinctly gloomy compared with the Bank of England forecasts. Could we go back to the screen of participants, please? Fantastic. Oliver Shah, we haven't talked about Brexit very much recently, and I was just wondering whether you thought that Brexit would soon be back in the news, and if so, for what reasons?
Just what we need after a year of the pandemic. Well, I think it will do. You saw talk of tariffs on ceramics today, and I think global trade in general is going to be a real issue, isn't it? Fragmentation and countries behaving in a slightly more protectionist way. You've seen the vaccine tension. You've seen all manner of shenanigans around financial access to European markets. So I think we're going to see a whole number of international trade stories come up over the next few years, and some of the vaccine stuff we've seen recently is just a taste of that. I think it's going to take a long time for the ill will of Brexit to subside with Europe, and especially small companies end up paying the price. I mean, the vaccines row, AstraZeneca has found itself caught in quite a tough place, hasn't it? A big global company sandwiched between two competing national interests. But a lot of the Brexit red tape is hitting SMEs, isn't it? I mean, small retailers that sell into Europe either way find their goods snarled up in red tape and extra cost for consumers. So I think we're going to see a whole load of different Brexit stories come up over the next couple of years, and these things may come out in dribs and drabs rather than big bangs.
Oliver, do you want to add a word about trade within the United Kingdom, the Great Britain to Northern Ireland issue? That again has been relatively quiet in the last few days, but it's not, I think, by any means resolved.
No, you're right. It's not a big issue, isn't it? I think, again, that's something that will flare up intermittently for a while. And it's hard to see exactly where that goes in the end. But it's very tough, isn't it? If you're exporting into Northern Ireland, there's extra burdens for you. And if you're a consumer in Northern Ireland, it's quite tough. And these things are going to take a long time to work out, I think.
I mean, not being overly political, still sticking with you, Oliver, for a moment. But of course, before the Brexit vote, there were a lot of people calculating how much smaller the British economy would be because of Brexit and so on. And you know, most people were on that side of the issue, saying the British economy would be smaller as a result of Brexit. On the other hand, and possibly related to Brexit, we have now got over 30 million people vaccinated with their first dose of the vaccine, and European Union partners are quite a long way behind. I'm just wondering whether that difference in the vaccination programs might not loom a great deal larger than other calculations around Brexit. In other words, the calculations that we were able to do before Brexit, when we didn't know there was going to be this huge vaccination gap.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think the pandemic has changed the picture in quite a few ways, hasn't it? And the UK, you would imagine, domestically, will be in for a good bounce this year and next. Hospitality, those who survive, I think, are going to take outsized shares of the market share that's left, because smaller, weaker players will go. And I'm sure Sarah's got a more detailed view on that. But I think people are going to want to go out and do stuff again. You see the weather the weekend and yesterday, you see everyone out in the parks. People feel more confident. The vaccine program, as you say, Michael, is ahead of where it is elsewhere in the world. So I think in terms of pure domestic consumer economy, we're in for a decent couple of years. But I think Brexit red tape will slow things down across the board, from financial services to retail. And I think it'll be another layer of treacle to wade through. I don't think it's going to be the end of the world, but I think it's going to drag on the economy.
Oliver, sticking with you just for a moment, given what you've just said about bounce back, that was your expression, why is it that you didn't raise your hand to vote for agreeing with the Bank of England a moment ago about being back to where we were by the end of the year? Do you think it's going to be just a little bit longer, or is it going to be much longer in your view?
My gut feel, and it's not particularly scientific, I'm not sure how scientific you can be, is that 2 years will be a good outcome. I think it might be longer than that. I think something we've seen in the pandemic is it's accelerated structural changes that were happening already. The channel shift to online, to services being outsourced to big tech companies, which don't have the same sort of tax base and employment base in the UK. That's all sped up, and I think for the winners, that's going to be good. But there are going to be plenty of losers in this, and I think blue collar employment is going to suffer. These retail hospitality jobs, we've seen a bloodbath in the past year. How easily are those people going to be re-employed? Potentially the supermarkets and Amazon take up some of that slack, but I'm not sure they'll take up all of it. I think that's going to have a big hit on consumer confidence, consumer economy, and it's an overused word, but unprecedented is what we've seen over the past year. I don't think we can understand the scale of the scarring until the morphine of government support comes off in the form of furlough, bounce back loans, C-bills. When economists measure this stuff, there's nothing they can measure it against. We've never had a period like this, such a steep drop in such a short amount of time, with such a high degree of government stimulus pumped in to cover the pain. And I think we can't know what the impact is on jobs and consumption until we come out of that, particularly given, as I said at the start, this channel shift to online and the shift in the tax base and the employment base and the spending base to the web.
Well, let's talk to an entrepreneur, Sarah Willingham. So you have recently launched Nightcap PLC on AIM. You did that in the middle of a pandemic. You're building up a drinks-led hospitality business. Are you seeing opportunities where others just see huge uncertainties, Sarah?
I hope so. Yeah, I think I've definitely been called bonkers quite a lot over the last few weeks, but I fundamentally believe, exactly as Oliver has just said, that pent-up demand for social interaction is enormous. And to not overuse that word, but it's the unprecedented sort of environment that we're seeing ahead of us in terms of the pricing of property for growth for those businesses that do have money to be able to grow, and also the availability of businesses that actually pre-COVID were fundamentally really sound businesses that have got solid P&Ls but now have decimated balance sheets. And it's about being that lifeline, or that source of that growth capital for those businesses, working with them, finding them, and being in a position to take advantage of that landscape now, where you are being able to find incredible opportunities with property that most businesses won't be able to do, because it'll all be about survival for the next 12 to 18 months for most businesses within hospitality. That's why we set it up.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more about, what processes you went through before you made your decision? I mean, what was there a sort of dark period last year, and then you kind of reassessed? How did that all work out for you?
I mean, I think probably like everybody else, 21st of March last year, closing down all hospitality businesses that I was involved in. I think we all went into a bit of shock, to be honest, for a few weeks. It was, we did not have any idea what this all meant. I mean, I think that first week where we didn't know whether or not there was going to be any help from government was probably one of the worst weeks of any of our lives. We had no idea what the future held. Then what became interesting actually was when hospitality reopened on the 4th of July, and I think that's when we saw for ourselves this pent-up demand that we're talking about. Of course, we had to have serious restrictions in all of the sites, but what I love about the industry is just how agile everybody was and how we adapted immediately to the needs of the restrictions and also the desire of the customers. People still wanted to go out. And it was sort of towards the end of the summer that I sat down with my husband, actually, who I work very closely with, and said, we are never going to have never and will never see this ever again in our lifetime. And I strongly believe that there's going to be a lot of activity on the public market again. And we've both floated businesses before, similar model to Nightcap, the sort of the cash shell model, and said, you know what, let's do it. And made that first phone call in September, fastest I've ever run, I think, over those weeks. I mean, the raising of the money, doing it all over Zoom. During our fundraising, the government announced tier 2 to tier 4, and by the end of it announced a national lockdown. So everything that went wrong did go wrong, but we just about managed to drag it kicking and screaming over the line at the beginning of January. Quite an experience.
Well, congratulations, Sarah, and best wishes. Paul Tooton, we're hearing there about pent-up demand, and I think there's considerable agreement so far that there is going to be pent-up demand. We're talking there about individual consumers, but does it also apply in the world of corporate finance? Is there pent-up demand that you think is going to reflect itself in a rush for new M&As?
Yeah, I tend to agree with some of the things that Sarah and Oliver just said. There is pent-up demand. These are unique circumstances where people are seeing opportunities that will never ever have been there before, and never might not be again. So from an M&A perspective, whether you're a private equity group or whether you're a corporate, you are seeing situations and opportunities that might not have ever have been there before. So for the private equity world, they think back to some of the minor crashes compared to what we've had now and recognize that actually at this moment of great uncertainty and recent shock, this could be the best time ever to invest in situations. And they don't want to miss out on that. And there's a huge amount of money, as you know, out there behind the private equity world to invest. And then the corporate world, for mid or large size companies, they too see opportunities. I think Sarah's using the word property that would never ever be available, whether it's people selling businesses or being prepared to sell for the first time in generations, large transactions happening where competition authorities insist on parts coming out that are very valuable to others. So there are sources of opportunity that have never been there before. And it's easy to generalize and sort of get depressed about it being a challenging environment. But in lots of niches, there are lots of great things happening, and people are looking for those and taking big bets to go after them.
Which niches, Paul Tooton?
Well, it's easy to think, what we're really focused on are companies or industries that have been resilient, vis-a-vis what's happened in the last 12 months. And there are obvious sectors where that has been the case. Obviously, the tech sector has been booming since last February, March. Healthcare has done the same. But what I'm always amazed by are in manufacturing industries, actually, or in the most unlikely of places. There are businesses that actually have proved to be resilient or have been doing really well as a result of what's happened. We've just done a project, or just done a deal with a business that was involved in hospitality staging. You know, the people that put events together. They've done really well because they managed to get a contract with with the Nightingale hospitals. You know, it was not expected. So they've been a real winner out of it. The other major theme that I think permeates an awful lot of the market right now and really is pushing values and therefore deals is this whole move to ESG. And I say it because it is exposing niches that I wouldn't have expected to be boom areas, but it's all to do with, at the crudest end, recycling, circular economy, renewables. All these areas are seeing unprecedented amounts of money being interested in them and looking for opportunities to invest. So there's a mix of niches all over the place, not just in the obvious sectors.
Sarah, you have worked with private equity quite a lot. Do you have a thought about where the niches are, where we're going to see M&A activity?
Yeah, I mean, I think I work with sort of private equity, VC, and with public markets, and I think VC, the focus is still very much on finding the best D2C business. There's a lot of activity in D2C businesses. Marketplaces are still thriving. I think we've seen new and very exciting markets come out. The whole again, still on the food theme, which is very much the bit I get excited about, but we're seeing a lot of activity, incredible growth this year from sort of 0 to 60 in 2 seconds of businesses that are doing these kind of restaurant kits, booze delivered to your home, new markets that we've not seen before are really thriving and coming out of this year. And I've seen a lot of decks, a lot of activity in there. I think private equity will still, particularly in hospitality, it's still very much a portfolio management. But I think one of the things that I think is really important, I'm chair of a different group of restaurants which is private equity backed. I think one of the things that is really important is that in that growth, that there's full alignment between everybody. And I think that's one of the things that is a real shift that we're seeing between the entrepreneurs with the people that are backing them and the banks. So you've got this private equity bank entrepreneur, and I think the discussions that are taking place in that triangle are different than I've ever seen before, because you might have a private equity that is their preference shares might be underwater, for example, their preference debt might be underwater, the equity of the owners is suddenly underwater, and it's okay. Do we start from scratch here? How do we grow the equity for the founders? And I think the founders are actually making sure that they come out and have possibly a stronger voice than I've seen in trying to make sure that they have that equity going forward, that otherwise they feel like they're working for nothing. And I think it's going to be that balance within those relationships that is going to be what's going to make the success of the model going forward in a different way than it has done historically.
Thank you very much. A couple of questions from the audience. Politically, it may be desirable to prop up struggling businesses, many of which were struggling before the pandemic, but wouldn't it be better for the government to bite the bullet and use the opportunity to allow inefficient businesses to fail and then reallocate the funds to more efficient and forward-thinking businesses? And I think a linked question, can we ask the panel about opportunities following the end of the lockdowns and opening up the reduction and elimination of government support? When failures come, is that an opportunity to buy distressed assets cheaply? I'm very happy to take replies from anyone on the panel who would like to have a go at those two linked questions. Raise a hand. Sarah, yeah, by all means.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think this is the sort of kind of the most interesting area now as we move over the next 12 months. What's happened at the moment, and I'm going to talk for hospitality because it's the industry that I know best, is that we're covered in sticky plasters. But there's no real, the end is coming. You know, the moratorium on the rent, the fact that we've got to start paying our C bills back. We have a help with VAT for this year, for the next sort of 9 months. But after that, what happens? The reality is that when this moratorium ends, we are facing a cliff edge. And I think that unless the help from the government is staggered, some form of kind of forced negotiation, forced mediation takes place, using that example with the landlords and the tenants, we will see an absolute bloodbath. I think it will be utter carnage out there, because at the moment we are heading towards, as I said, that proper cliff edge. Now, it's interesting. Do you say, well, do you allow that to happen? And we've got to remember that the situation that we're in at the moment is actually, it's nobody's fault, right? Nobody's overexpanded, nobody's overborrowed. It's not the situation that we've seen historically as businesses start to fold and people's equity is under the water. And I think that's where we've, you know, I think the very weak businesses have already gone. You know, we saw that at the beginning of the pandemic. Where we're at risk now is at the cliff edge, and actually really good, sound, solid businesses, if they don't have the support of the banks, as David was saying, if that cliff edge is allowed to just happen, I think we will see an unnecessary amount of businesses going bankrupt, doing CVAs or being forced, depending on how the banks behave. So I'm nervous about that, very nervous for a lot of businesses. It's that upcoming cliff edge, which I know is there, and I think it's going to be carnage, if I'm being honest.
I will come to Oliver Shah in just a moment, but David Beaty, while that is just in our mind, cliff edge, is that the way you see it?
I hope not, because I think that the government must be very mindful of that. And in terms of the way specifically that banks might be able to support the avoidance of that, is an ongoing support to our customers by way of capital repayment, holidays where appropriate, where customers have borrowed money on C-bills, for example, over 6 years, that can be extended to 10 years if needed. So I think there will need to be, to Sarah's point, an amount of flexibility from the banks to support those customers that perhaps need a little bit more short-term support, but have the potential for a long-term viable future. So I sincerely hope it won't be a cliff edge, and I'm sure that everybody across industry and government will be doing everything that we can to avoid that situation. But Sarah makes the point, there is a real risk of it.
Oliver Shah, what were you going to say?
A couple of points. The question was asking about government intervention quite broadly, and whether companies should be allowed to fail and the market to reshape things, and whether government money would be better spent investing in new industries. I think one facet of the 2019 victory Boris Johnson got, with the swing of loads of Labour seats to the Tories in the North and the Midlands, is the Tories are now, having delivered Brexit, having to think about these blue wall areas, they're now called, in a different way, and they're hoping that coalition will hold for the next election in 2024, and that is leading them to think about, I think, quite unhealthy pork barrel politics, where they're tempted to pump taxpayers' money into companies in these areas to keep them alive in quite a sort of knee-jerk, hand-to-mouth way. You saw Flybe bailed out quite shambolically by Boris last year, regional airlines servicing places across the UK. You're now seeing a debate around Liberty Steel, owned by Sanjeev Gupta, with 5,000 UK jobs at risk. And I think there's a real danger that the short-term expediency of keeping jobs in these areas leads the government to pump hundreds of millions of pounds taxpayers' money into unviable companies, which could be better rearranged with more thought. I think if you're going to try and save the steel industry in the UK, if you decide it's strategically important to have your own steel industry, which is totally fair enough thing to decide, servicing BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce and all those kind of people. You need to think about how you reshape it properly, and is it efficient to have a load of different plants around the country as we do currently, making specialty steel, all of which are subscale and struggle to compete on cost basis against China and other steel making countries? Or if the government is going to rescue this industry, should it not let Liberty Steel collapse and then properly think about structuring taxpayer cornerstone investment behind a new, more efficient steel industry based around a single site or a couple of single sites, which works better? So I think there's that point around the electoral maths of the blue wall seats, which encourages the government to think about pork barrel politics in quite an unhealthy way. On Sarah's point around landlords and the moratorium, she's obviously a million times closer to the leisure industry than I am, so I respect her view. But I've spent a long time covering property as well, and I speak to a lot of those commercial landlords quite frequently. I think I'm not sure I necessarily agree there will be a bloodbath if the moratorium ends and the government lets the market take its course. I think landlords are acutely aware how weak the market is for new lettings right now, and they're very worried about being left with the empty rates bill if tenants go. I'm not sure a lot of landlords are in a position to go and beat up all their tenants immediately and take back the keys and turf a load of people out over the rent bill. I think landlords might be more pragmatic in many cases than people imagine, certainly more than their reputation has them down for in the past. And I think you might actually see some more sensible deals being thrashed out between more progressive-minded landlords and tenants over how to deal with these arrears. You know, a third being written off, a third being spread out over time, and a third being repaid. But there will always be bad actors when there are headlines about certain guy who owns a Trocadero going around duffing up tenants even during the moratorium and filing court action. So there will always be bad players. But I think the market might actually surprise people with how consensually it can work out some of these rent issues.
Michael, can I just add from a corporate finance perspective, just in terms of irrespective of what the government does, and in anticipation potentially of a cliff edge, many companies are unilaterally, if you like, they've evolved their business models over the last year, and they're now looking at the best way, not just to survive, but to capitalize on the opportunities in front of them. So what we're seeing is an awful lot of combinations of businesses. Not necessarily, cash is not changing hands, but people, private owners or whatever, are seeing actually a better, a safer way of taking advantage of the future by actually combining their businesses with others. They may have been competitors before, they may have been complementary, but they're looking for a bit more size, because obviously one of the things that's been put in stark contrast over the last year is just the fragility. If you're very small, you really are very exposed. And so people are looking for a bit more scale, a bit more size, and combination with other entities. That is a big feature of the M&A market at the moment in the UK.
Thank you very much. Very interesting comments. Can we take another poll, please? And the poll will suddenly pop up. Yes, it will. So, how confident do you feel the recovery will be rapid this year? This is pretty similar to question 1, but please let's see your poll results. And please could we go back to the view of the panelists? Good. Thank you very much. So, other questions from the audience? Will working from home to a significant degree continue for most businesses that can? And then, likewise, will international business travel recover to the same extent that it was pre-pandemic? Somebody else has said, will long-haul air travel ever recover? Ever recover 2019 levels? Those seem like pretty good questions. Sarah, you know about leisure, but anyone else who'd like to make comments on those? Working from home and air travel are the two subjects being raised. Who would like to have a go at that? David Beaty.
I think with regard to working from home, I think the way that we work will have changed forever, but I don't think we can underestimate the value of the office environment for colleagues in terms of camaraderie, team ethos, learning and development, all of these things. So I think that it's only, we're yet to experiment with what life looks like without the benefit of the office environment. So I think we will see offices used in a slightly different way, certainly in the short term, and more people being able to work from home and being flexible, but I don't necessarily see that being a permanent and inevitable situation moving forward. And very briefly on travel, I think that we will see a reduction in international business travel, in part because of pressure on companies around the achieving a more net zero carbon economy. So I think there'll be pressure on companies around that. And will international travel get back to pre-pandemic? Yes, I'm confident that that will happen.
Well, that is a very bold prediction. Let us take the results of our poll, please. Let's see those in a pie chart. Well, more than half believe that they are fairly confident that the recovery will be rapid this year. So just to remind you, the OBR is predicting 4% improvement in GDP this year and 7.3%. But quite strikingly to me, 32% think not at all confident that the recovery will be rapid this year. And could we go back to the view of the panelists, please? And I think actually, just to make progress, let's take the third poll question. What do you think could be the biggest issue facing UK PLC this year? So you only get 4 choices, but let's have the poll results on that one, please. And they're flooding in already. Okay, let's go back to the view of the panelists, please, if we may. We've got some questions from the audience. Sarah, do you think that a new model of private equity-backed hospitality businesses is coming, where it's more of an operating partnership rather than simply an alternative lender to senior debt?
I hope so. I think certainly the way that private equity has been structured over where we are today doesn't work for the founder, and I think it is going to be a different working partnership where the kind of old interest rates are going to remain low. We're all anticipating. I think we'll see a good move into public markets, not just because that's what I've done this year. I just think there is the activity levels that we're seeing for IPOs is back to sort of 2004 levels. But I do think that working relationship needs to change in the way that it's structured. You know, historically, we all know that equity is the riskiest form of investment. So we all know that. The problem is at the moment is that the people with the equity are all underwater, but actually through no fault of their own. And so you've got founders. We're finding a lot of businesses coming to us. A lot of the founders are coming to us and saying, I'm underwater. I can't even get the preference debt above water with my private equity. How am I ever going to recoup anything from this business? How long is it going to take me? And so we're looking at alternative sources of structuring to allow the founders to be able to be motivated to want to work rather than just jack it all in and start again, which is what a lot of them are starting to feel. So that's why I think that relationship between the private equity and the founders is going to have to shift. And I think there's going to have to be a more of a open relationship when it comes to the value of equity and that preference debt. I think it's very important.
David Fleming, I was just coming to you, so you're very welcome to add whatever you like on that point. I was also going to ask you a rather specialist question, which is that the government has recently announced reforms for pre-packaged insolvency, which includes the concept of an independent evaluator. And does that idea that you need a third-party scrutiny of an insolvency practitioner's judgment reflect negatively on your profession? Why don't you answer that while it's still in our mind, and then come back to whatever comment you had a moment ago?
Well, I think the kind of links, I'm happy to kind of cover both off. I think what Sarah was talking around about the equity holder being out of money is something that we are definitely seeing when we're advising companies at the moment. Definitely entrepreneurs that had equity value pre the pandemic have now got balance sheets that are full of debt and a significant lack of equity. So I think what Sarah was saying is very very real out there, and a lot of people have got the C-bills and the HMRC arrears, and they haven't paid the landlords due to the protection that they've had, etc. So they're now faced with a situation where they're looking to come out of the pandemic, but with an awful lot of debt. And whilst, and I appreciate what David Beaty was saying around the ability to extend debt and C-bill loans, etc., the reality is it's certainly a long walk out the pandemic to repay that debt. So it's not it's something that the businesses have got to service, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs are now trying to make the decision as to what their options are, which brings me on to the pre-pack comment that question that you've just asked. Well, I think it doesn't reflect well on the profession, the fact that the government have decided the need to introduce a third party to provide an opinion on the pre-pack and the value. I think there's a lack of understanding in the general market that there are actually already controls in place with regards to valuations and sale processes that we have to go through on the pre-pack already to get the best value for creditors. So I think it is very unhelpful. I think we need more guidance with regards to the evaluator that the government have mentioned to bring into the pre-pack, and how are they qualified and what are their credentials. I think there's more information needed behind that, but it doesn't hinder, I would say, our ability to assist businesses. Without a shadow of a doubt, it is one of the tools that we will look at and we will use. It's an extra hurdle, but it wouldn't stop anybody taking that course of action if that is the best course of action for the business and the rescue of that business. But we have lots of other tools in the bag, as Sarah talked about. CVAs last year. We've got new permanent measures in place with regards to the moratorium and the restructure plan that we can use. And more importantly, 85% of the businesses that we deal with are on a solvent turnaround basis. So what I would say is, whilst the pre-pack is used and is probably more in the firing line, if you like, from a reputational point of view, we have a lot of other tools we can use to save businesses, and we'll continue to do that.
David Fleming, it may be that this question from the audience would also be one that you'd like to tackle. Given that we're already seeing accountancy and other firms not returning to leasehold premises, do you see a huge adverse impact on pension funds in the coming year? Happy with that one, David?
Yeah, no, happy to. I mean, yes, I think there is an issue. Going back to what David talked about, I think that it is important that people spend time together in offices, but without, there will be, and we will be looking at this as well, working from home part of the time, and video calls have become a daily exercise and experience for everybody. So I would imagine when leases are coming to an end, there'll be many businesses in central London, central Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Liverpool, and around the country that won't take and renew the leases, take less space, etc. And if pension funds being a big owner of commercial property, I would say they will be impacted as well. So yes, I think there will be an impact to the pension funds, and how that plays out is only to be seen.
I wonder whether we could take the result of the third poll question, please. Now, unemployment and corporate failures, well, not surprising that those are very much on people's minds. And I suspect that those respondents found it difficult to choose between the two because they are so closely linked. What stands out to me in this poll is that Brexit comes in at only 14%. I think that would not have been the result that we might have expected a few months ago, but everything has changed in the last few months. Could we go back to the view of the panelists, please? Excellent. This is pretty much a comment from a member of the audience. Regarding the poll question about recovery, and particularly in relation to hospitality and leisure, I suspect there'll be an initial bounce back and a bumper summer, followed by another reduction in trade into Q4 21 and Q1 22 due to actual or perceived job insecurity and social distancing measures. Well, I suppose that is quite possible. Oliver Shah, I haven't heard from you for a while. I wonder if you could sort of give us a big picture thought. You know, as we came out of 2008, newspapers were writing lots of stories about corporate greed and banking scandals and all sorts of things like that. So what do you think is going to be the sort of range of stories that's going to follow this immense crisis that we've all been going through?
In terms of corporate morals, I think bankers, for once, have been fairly well behaved. Although we'll see when it comes to recouping all the bounce back loans, just how well they emerge from that. But I think one thing we're seeing already is around, it's not quite moral hazard, is it? But it's people who are taking taxpayers' money and maybe trying to keep hold of it or not giving it back when they could afford to. The debate started off being, you know, if you're going to pay a dividend or bonuses, you should repay furlough money or CL bills or CCFF or whatever kind of support you've received. I think that the goalposts have now moved to, if you can at all afford to repay furlough, you should do. And we're going to see more debate around that, I think, given how many people have benefited from, you know, not just furlough, but other forms of support over the past year. And I think on the back of that, you know, the amount of state involvement we've had propping up private enterprise, we're going to have more general debate around what private companies can do for the economy and society. You know, everyone talks about ESG right now. I think we've had lots of the G, and we're having more of the E in the form of climate change. And I think we're going to have more of the S as well coming up. You know, companies being forced to think about society and stakeholders in a broader way that maybe they wouldn't have had to 5-10 years ago, even post the financial crisis. So I think companies are going to be expected to at least make noises about doing their bit for UK as well as UK PLC, and we're going to see more debate around, you know, companies' societal responsibilities and are they behaving in a way that you know, doesn't harm or helps other stakeholders as well as their shareholders and employees.
On your first point, Oliver, one of our audience has asked about the possibility of a big scandal around fraud on government furlough schemes and other schemes. Do you think that's going to be a feature, big fraud stories?
Yeah, we've written a fair bit about that on the Sunday Times, and there have been lots of reports of furlough fraud. There have been all kinds of estimates of how many billions have been taken through bounce back loans and spent on Lamborghinis and yachts and that kind of stuff. I mean, you're always going to get some of that, aren't you? Without being complacent, I think the Chancellor had to put some fairly wide-ranging, quick blanket measures in place last April, May. If he hadn't done that, there would have been a real bloodbath, and he would have had a lot of stick for not supporting companies through no fault of their own through lockdown. So he had to do that stuff. But yes, we are going to see more fraud stories, I think, and sadly, I think that's an inevitable byproduct of just how much support had to go to so many needy mouths so quickly.
Other questions from the audience, which I think are quite interesting. One simply says, well, will businesses now be better equipped to handle a future pandemic? And a more specific question, one of our webinar members wants to know whether vaccine passports are a good or a bad idea. And by vaccine passports, let's not mean international travel. Let's mean a pass that enables you to get into certain functions or buildings in the domestic environment. Anyone want to react to those questions, please? David Beaty.
Happy to. Briefly, I think it's inevitable that lessons will have been learned by corporate Britain around how better to respond to similar circumstances in the future. So I know that there'll be lessons learned. We know that 75% of our customers say they have changed their business during the course of the last 12 months, and some of those changes undoubtedly will be permanent and will be for the better longer term viability of the business. I wouldn't like to comment on vaccine passports. Perhaps I'll pass that to Oliver or Sarah to comment on, maybe whether Sarah feels she'd let people into her pubs and restaurants if they got a vaccine passport or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one. There's a lot of talk about it at the moment across hospitality because of the bureaucracy. You know, obviously in hospitality, everybody wants to get back to doing what we do best, which is giving the customers a great time. I think if it turns out, I guess it depends on the remaining rollout of the vaccine. But one thing I have seen this year across the entire industry is whatever has been thrown at hospitality, we've kind of picked it up and run with it to ensure that we do whatever is necessary to allow us to open those doors and have people in there safely. And I think no matter what the outcome is, and what government tell us we need to do in order to be able to do that, I think, you know, there's a lot of people that there's a lot of research showing, does hospitality really spread? You know, how many cases really started in hospitality? I think all of that aside, if people need a vaccine passport to feel safe, I think the industry will support whatever is needed, again, to allow us to be able to open the doors to ensure that people will come in, have a good time, feel safe, and actually feel normal again. And I think that normality is really important in something that, you know, I think we can't underestimate the mental health issues of this year. And actually, hospitality industry is key to that. It's very, very important that we are able to open the doors as normally as possible, to allow people to get back to doing what they want to do.
Very quickly, I've got to run off at 11. I apologise.
I was just about to say that. Why don't Oliver? You've got to go. Give us a summary comment. Then we'll let you go. Then I'm going to ask the other panelists for their summary comment as well.
Well, just on that point,
thank you for your attendance.
No, thank you, Michael, for hosting. On that point around passports, I agree with Sarah. I think anything that can help the industry reopen is a good thing. I think it's a matter of personal choice. So I think it should be up to individual operators whether they ask for passports at the door, and it should be up to individual punters as to whether or not they want to get vaccinated and have a passport or not. I think it's a matter of personal liberty, but I think it's a good thing if the industry can reopen. And I've got to dash straight to a meeting, so I apologise, but thank you to the other panelists, and thank you, Michael, for hosting.
Oliver, thank you so much. So yes, I'd like each panelist to make us a summary comment if they would, but possibly including this question which came from the audience. Given a long-term working trend, what will our city centres look like in 5 years' time? And will the pandemic result in a UK economy which is less centred on London and the South East? Or, on the other hand, is it going to exacerbate that issue? David Fleming, we've not heard from you for a while. Would you like to summarise, possibly taking account of that question?
Well, I think we've, you know, as a summary comment, we've survived the pandemic from an insolvency perspective and restructuring perspective. It's the quietest market we've had for many years. So it does show that the businesses have survived through the extensive government support that we've talked about. My kind of summary comment will be, it'll be interesting to see once the temporary measures disappear and the furlough support is no longer available to companies. I think that's when that businesses will need to decide on what they do going forward. And I know that Sarah talks about this cliff edge, and it'll be interesting to see how the government deal with that timing of the measures. Now, with regard to city centres, I think they will change. I think they will be quieter. But going back to what David said, I think you know, we have a lot of people that are keen to get back to the office to see and speak to each other, and you can't do that over the WebEx and video calls that we have now. So I suppose that summarises my view of where we are.
David Fleming, thank you. David Beaty, your summary?
First of all, thank you very much to Kroll for organising this event, Michael, and you for hosting it. I would say let's be confident about the future of our mighty Britain, and let's all play our part as individuals in supporting growth. I certainly know that I'll be doing my bit to support the hospitality industry. You'll be pleased to know, Sarah, in the months ahead, look forward to doing that. And HSBC is certainly ready to stand behind the UK economy and support British businesses.
Thank you, David. Let's indeed hear from Sarah now, your summary.
Yeah, I'm actually very bullish, certainly about this year. I would have ticked very in that last poll. I think we will see I think we will go into high demand for the UK supply of whether it be hospitality. I think we will want to spend money this year. And I think we will see businesses start to recoup and start to grow, start to recoup some of what they've lost. I actually think it's more towards the end of the year and next year that we will really start to see the businesses come in that David Fleming's talking about, where we're going to need more restructuring. But I think this year I'm actually looking forward to the demand from the public being met by the businesses within the UK.
Quite interesting that we've got all the way through this discussion 1 hour without mentioning mutations, which seem to me to be a bit of a threat that lurks outside our country. Paul Tewton, your summary.
Well, I think I'm upbeat. I'm despite the continued uncertainty, I've been impressed by the resilience of individuals and companies and the way that they've coped with what's been thrown at them in the last year. And I think I'm pretty confident I'm going to see businesses try to remain as confident as they can be to take advantage of what's coming. And I think we're seeing it already in the volumes of deals happening in M&A in the UK, the record at the end of Q4, and that's continued through this year. People are looking to see what they can do with to make the best of their situation and capitalize on the opportunities ahead.
I would certainly like to thank David Fleming, David Beaty, Paul Tewton, Sarah Willingham and Oliver Shah, who's departed. But I'd also very much like to thank the webinar participants who have thrown in many more questions than I've been able to put to the audience, put to the panel, and who have also participated strongly in the poll. So thanks to everybody. I found it a thoroughly interesting discussion. I would say that it's interesting that we didn't mention mutations, because that could possibly be a setback. It's a threat out of left field that's worth bearing in mind. Let's hope it doesn't come to very much. But it's my pleasure to have been able to host this part of the webinar, and now to hand back to Matt Ingram.
Michael, thank you so much, and on behalf of my colleagues David, Paul and everybody at Kroll, thank you to you and all the panelists for your participation today. I have thoroughly enjoyed having the very easy role of standing by and listening to everything everybody said. I found it enthralling, and I think there's lots to take away. And my summary, Michael, that I've noticed over the last 12 months is how well improved everybody's home broadband connections are, because we've managed to get through an hour without any stuttering, without losing any participants, and it's always a huge relief. So with that, thank you for everybody who's taken the time to join us today. I hope you all have a fantastic Easter, get the opportunity to see friends and family in the outdoor spaces. And once again, on behalf of Kroll, thank you to you, Michael, and our panelists. It's been a really enjoyable session. And with that, Astrid, if I could ask you to end the session and wish everybody a good day.
Thank you.
Yeah.